Hello, and thank you for watching wherever and whenever you happen to be doing it. My name is Aidan Flax Clark, and I'm coming to you from the New York Public Library, where I put together Live from NYPL. And I'm just so grateful you're all watching. And I'm also grateful that I get to introduce this conversation between two incredible writers, Margo Jefferson, the Pulitzer Prize-winning critic and memoirist, and Doreen St. Félix, a staff writer and television critic at The New Yorker. They are here to talk about Margo's new book, Constructing a Nervous System. It's a companion to her previous book, Negroland. And if you're familiar with Margo's work, you won't be surprised to learn that Constructing a Nervous System is another singular, inspired, and electric piece of writing. Like with so much of Margo's work, encountering this book is a truly singular reading experience. And I think you're in for a truly singular conversational experience tonight, too. We're so honored that she's here with us to speak about it, and we're equally honored that Doreen has taken the time to speak with her. Now, in case you haven't had the chance to put the book in your hands yet, hopefully you're watching this on our website at nypl.org/live, because if you're at the event page there, you will find a link on that page to both buy the book or check it out. And I encourage you to do whichever one best suits your life. The link to purchase the book, which we're also sharing in the chat, will point you toward buying it from our own library shop, which means that proceeds from your purchase go to benefit the New York Public Library. And if you'd rather borrow it from us with a valid New York Public Library card, we love that. And obviously, everyone who's watching right now and who lives in the New York area has a library card, but just in case, there's a link for how to get a library card on the event page as well. Coming up in the weeks ahead, Live from NYPL has a non-stop series of fantastic conversations that we're presenting online and in person at the New York Public Library. And we'd love to see you at all of them, frankly. Just next week, you can hear conversations and readings featuring Brewster Kahle, Bernardine Evaristo, Cixin Liu, Yasha Mounk, and Latinx in publishing. And there's so much more past that. So to see everything that's happening, and most importantly, to register, go to nypl.org/live. Live from NYPL is made possible by the continuing generosity of Celeste Bartos, Manaz Ispahani Bartos, and Adam Bartos, and of course by all of you, our wonderful supporters near and far. So thank you so much for that support. And thank you again for watching tonight. Okay, so let's get to this conversation. If you have questions for Margo, she will be very glad to take some of them at the end. And you can send them anytime during the conversation by using the chat or by emailing publicprograms@nypl.org. Also, if you're looking for real-time captions for tonight's program, you can click on the closed caption button or use the stream text link that we shared in the reminder email. And we also just put that in the chat too. Okay, thanks again for watching. And let's bring on Doreen St. Félix and Margo Jefferson.
Hello, Margo, how are you?
Oh, I'm well, Doreen. How are you?
I'm doing so much better now that I am going to be speaking to you for an hour.
Very nice.
Here's a wonderful book that we will be discussing. Margo Jefferson is a simply unparalleled critic, observer of the world, an idol of mine. I remember being maybe 24 years old and asking her to answered a few questions for me for a story I was writing for Vogue, and she invited me over for wine and we had an incredible time. So I have to say it's very meaningful to be speaking with you tonight.
Well, you know, these things go both ways. You were so smart and funny, and I thought, whoa, all right. And then there you were, everywhere. Yes. And there I am reading you. So
ditto.
Here we go.
Yeah. Here we go. Let's start. So because at my heart, I can be, a fan. I guess I have to start with a very cliched question, and it's about titles. In the opening pages of Constructing a Nervous System, you tell us in a declarative address why this is a conceit that you've chosen. But I want to know, because the title is also both the structure in many ways, when did you know, was it before the process of writing or during the process of writing, that the only way to represent this constellation of influences, as it were, would be through this structure that we know from biology, this idea?
No, it was not at the beginning. I was making my way. I was, collaging and magpieing and juxtaposing and taking apart and putting back together. I knew the structure had to be a sense of things being constructed, put together, taken apart, reassembled, that I knew. But it wasn't until I was about halfway through when I was having dinner with a friend, the writer Wendy Walters, and I was bemoaning my difficulty writing this. I said, oh, it's so hard. And she said, yeah, it is hard. And I said, well, I know that, but you're a friend, but you're not me. Why is it so hard? Tell me. And she said, it's like constructing a nervous system. And I thought, well, I can hold on to that. It was like a spine. It gave me a certain, I felt upright. I thought, okay, that's orderly, and it helps me. It helps me go forward. It's a system. You know how something just comes alive for you and helps guide you. Yeah, it was like my trail of breadcrumbs, except it was constructing a nervous system. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then I think so much of you as the person who has united what we might see as disparate figures, that of the critic, who we associate with authority, with omniscience, as you write, and that of the memoirist, who we think of as being vulnerable, pliable, fragile even. And so I have to ask, maybe even, going back a few decades ago, when you decided to leave the weekly critic position, did you know that memoir was going to be next for you? What is it about that genre, that form, that way of thinking that appealed to you and made sense as the next phase in your writing?
Yes, right. Well, I left the Times just as I had finished Michael Jackson. So
right.
It was facing me. And I did know that I didn't want, which people would often ask for very good reason, who's the next, compelling show business, theatrical figure you're going to write about? And I said, memoir had always been something I assumed I would keep my distance from. So it did surprise me that I began working with somewhat constricted, tight little autobiographical scenes. Maybe you'd call them vignettes if they were fictional. I think what really pulled me and pushed me was the fact that right before my eyes, the world that I had always known in some way I wanted to write about, this complicated, very self-conscious world of variously called Black elite, Negro aristocracy, et cetera, it was mortality, was reaching it. It was disappearing before my eyes. Grandparents had mostly died. My father had died. My mother was much older. And I thought, every gesture, every way of, every word, every way of speaking, every expression, it matters. I have to take it in. So that really drove me. I thought of myself as a combination maybe of a reporter and maybe a playwright, just taking it down, getting the manners and modes. And that helped me be a little less self-conscious. Where I really stumbled writing it, and it took a long time, I'm thinking of Negroland now, was with the part of me that is a critic. I kept thinking, well, because memoir involves confession and a kind of fragility and revelation, I thought, what am I going to do with this critic, this stern, severe critic? And when I finally realized, no, it needn't, they needn't be cast aside. This is as much a part of you, as all these other little temperamental qualities that we describe and discuss so intimately about ourselves. So you have to find a way to dramatize and use it. And that really made it possible for me. And it made possible my desire not to work with a kind of traditional, let's say chronological arc. I did want to keep juxtaposing. I was also very interested in the fact that this world I'd grown up in was always asking you to perform in various ways. The good daughter, the little prodigy, the hip little high school girl. So I thought, all right, the critic is also a character. Again, if I'm going to compare it to theater, a bit like the director, or the the dramaturg giving notes after each scene, and that really helped. I also realized that you can. This is a fairly simple revelation, but you can tell the same story in many different ways, and that gave me the courage to start constructing a nervous system. And then, of course, I realized, because by that time, much in one's life had changed. There were deaths, there were new experiences. I thought, oh, all right. You will add new stories to this old story. You have so many things, and I think you would agree with me, so many experiences, obsessions, whatever. I think you'd agree with me as a journalist. You write about them. Sometimes they're manufactured because that's your assignment that week, but often they're intensely felt, and then you move on. So all of this material gets kind of stored away, and you sometimes don't go back to it for years or think about it. So I started consciously, examining myself and questioning myself and going back over notes and articles to reconnect with things that had mattered terribly to me, that I was taking for granted in some way. I worked not to be embarrassed about those old fixations and obsessions that just stay with you, and you think, I'm too clever for that, but you're not. So you find find a way. Yeah, I think, does that help?
Absolutely. And thinking about your last, I have to say, I think a quality that doesn't often get ascribed to you that I think about all the time is that you're very funny.
You fill my heart. Thank you.
And the humor is often quite morbid. And there's the section constructing where you're discussing Nina Simone. And so much of what makes this book really fascinating is that the art that we love, in some sense, is frozen in time, but we change along with it. We age, and our relationships in some ways change the art. And that's something that you do in the book. You'll reframe quotations or imagine conversations between figures that you were obsessed with. And there's a moment where you make a little quip about Nina Simone in the 50s. And you say something along the lines of, the Margo, in her preteen years, you would have wanted her to be lighter skinned.
Exactly.
And that to me was it was an example of, I think, of your larger posture of identifying the taboos that do still exist amongst Black women thinkers in the public, which is to say, to talk about the parts of our desires that are unbecoming, that are a bit ugly, that, might show us to be in some ways in an antagonistic relationship with what is supposed to be our love of ourselves.
Absolutely.
I think so often there's this narrative that the only way to interact with the self is to affirm it.
Yes, a kind of psychic triumphalist and cultural triumphalist narrative. Yeah,
absolutely. And constructing, interestingly, with that initial word, is actually kind of about annihilation. And it, in some ways, makes me think of the writing on suicide in Negroland. So I wanted to ask you about how you got to be so free, how you got to be able to write these things that, the freest, rudest of us still have a hang up about making public.
Well, the words "so free" applied to me make me go, oh, and what? Former Margo doing now? Here are a couple of things. First of all, one is always borrowing pieces of bravery from other writers, other artists, whatever. But one thing that forced me to be free, and maybe to be freer about these kinds of confessions and concessions and self-admonitions that you really wish were declarations of rapture and self-love. I really wanted to be just and be fair and be truthful about what each generation, what my generation went through, the ways in which you are shaped by the culture. You want, in a sense, to be shaped by the culture. And you're flawed. You are damaged. You're limited. So I really wanted to get at, in terms of class, for example, really documenting all those snobberies, and those go into looks, but also would that I could have presented myself or lived as the constant rebel. I wasn't. So the way I could, if not exonerate myself, at least live with that, was to turn a quite ruthlessly exact eye on it. Often if you start with, you mentioned a certain morbid or mordant comedy, often I find, for me, if I start with that, that's a way to break through my decorum, my anxiety. That can lead you to other tones, maybe to acknowledging a sort of grief, a kind of self-abnegation that humor can protect you from, but it can absolutely dig and let you find that way to those other voices. So I can't say I think of myself as free, but it has been a long, arduous, I don't want to say struggle. I don't want to say journey. Can you help me find another word, Doreen?
Oh gosh.
A lot, I've
movement.
It's been a movement. It's sometimes very slow and steady, sometimes shuffling along, like Cecil and Blake said, sometimes striding. But I became more ashamed of the things I was hiding. As I grew older, as I had more ambitions for my writing, I became more bothered by, ashamed of those things than of anything, any of the content that I'd been so careful to hide.
Wow. I'm curious about your relationship to anger, because there are two passages in Constructing. The first is you discussing being a professor and working with a lot of white female students, and in some ways reacting to their presence by deciding to not be emotional in that way. When
I was going to be the uber omniscient narrator,
right?
You'll be mistress of the rebels. Yeah,
exactly. Even the ironist at times.
Yes,
and then
teaching them a white woman's text. Will account. Yeah,
exactly. But then later, I think there's a really meaningful progression after we get to your just realization of how your feelings about Willa Cather change once you realize her obsession with white rapture. And then towards the end of the book, you start to write about how you want to be able to claim a deeper relationship to anger. And so I was wondering, how has that played out, not only in your writing, but in your life, being more comfortable with showing that emotion, which obviously for women like us is so charged, especially in our writing. No one wants to be the one writing the manifesto. No one wants to be the one making people think that she's a hysteric, that sort of thing.
Yes, exactly. Yes, there is a figure of the Black female hysteric, as there is the white female hysteric. That's right. All right. So wait, what was the question? You drew that figure of the Black female hysteric so compellingly that I froze.
I guess I'm curious about
anger, relationships to anger.
Right. How have you, what's the work that you've done? I hate to sound like a therapist, but
yeah, let's say we're saying, but the work that one's done both, in life, but to get it to the page, because that's what we're talking about. I think once my mother and father had both died, and yes, I adored them, but they firmly shaped me, and righteous anger was appropriate, but no other kind, and it still had to be modulated. They were gone. I was also I was in this world of writing books, not writing to order, in a sense, for the creation that was the intelligent, thoughtful critic, Margo Jefferson, who could be angry, but a formal critic's anger is always mediated and shaped by a kind of the rational discourse. You're arguing, you're explaining, you're justifying yourself, but seeming to be too good to justify yourself. So there I was alone, with what books am I going to write? If you're going to start writing books, you're going to have to start not only looking to stories and material that you hadn't looked to before, you're going to have to look to modes of expression. That means modes of emotion as well as thinking. And I just started to have fun with it. It was a way of expressing that I had dabbled in, but that I hadn't fully. I thought of it as, okay, I'm acquiring, this is a new repertoire. I'm acquiring these skills. And I liked the idea of trying to find ways, styles of expressing, demonstrating, acting out anger that seemed to me to be countering the expectations that I, as certainly as a Black woman, felt at least were being imposed on me. And you seem to feel they are still imposed on women of your generation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, even modes of anger. Society can find certain modes of anger in, whether it's women, minorities, there are other people, because they can accommodate certain kinds. So, we have to stay on our toes about how to invent modes and styles of anger that aren't so easy to accommodate, or that at least last and hold.
Right. I think about the way in which you are a character in Negroland and the way that you are a character in constructing. And there are aspects of your life that we've learned in Negroland, for example, your experience as an actor in theater as a young girl and dancing, that are much more slight, at least on the text level and constructing, but of course are actually sometimes more present in the actual form. And so I wanted to ask you about how I'd say three mediums, jazz, dance, and theater, change your voice on the page, because there are just moments in the book where I was like, I feel like I'm reading Funny House of a Negro. I feel like I'm reading
big influence.
Yes.
Kennedy, yes.
Or, when you interact with jazz lyrics, for example, it made me wonder about all the other Margos that could have been. Margo the actor, Margo the blues singer.
Don't I wish? Margo the jazz singer. Yeah, Margo the jazz singer. But no accident that I'm start playing with Eva Waters, right away,
Right.
stealing her lyrics. When I was young and, doing all these things, and, the Jefferson girls got dance lessons and music lessons, and not, these girls got this. I was a good pianist, and then later I got interested in acting. My sister cleaved on to dance. But I was always dreadfully afraid that I was a dilettante, because I never, college came and I kind of let piano go, and I still dabbled a little in acting. I lived really for years, even when I got to journalism school, because of course journalism can make you feel like a dilettante too, if you feel I'm not getting deeper, I'm not reaching further. So that was really a kind of terror of mine, and that muted itself somewhat and became an anxiety, slightly kind of wary. Now watch out, don't spread yourself too thin, don't be too glib. But I think with particularly constructing a nervous system, but also I think with Negroland, that being able to have different voices in counterpoint, in dialogue, in opposition, sometimes just indicated by pronouns. I'd switch from an I to a you to a me. That made me feel, okay, there's a way to bring intense plays with rhythms and tones and registers, which is musical, but also with moments of dramatic tension, of emotional text and subtext, diction. Way to do that. am really wanted to do much more of that with constructing a nervous system. There was that. And then as I wrote, it turned out, God, I'm really, really obsessed with some of these, musicians, singers, performers. But I'm not a ongoing there. I guess my fear of being a little bit of a dilettante came back again. I thought, okay, but I'm not an actress, though I know theater well. I know a lot about music, but I'm not a music critic. So how do I find my particular way as the fan, the critic, the immersed, enraptured, and sometimes repelled person? How do I find my own style of engaging? And it tended to be dialogic, as we say, and also theatrical, as well as a form in maybe of musical theater.
Incredible. I'd have a question about your fears. Yes. I think a conversation that I have with my friends often, because our sense of audience, writers who are writing, exactly to the internet, is so augmented and distended.
Yes.
And as I was reading your book, I kept thinking that there were certain passages that if they had been extracted and dropped online, people would have lost their minds over. For example, your discussion of Topsy, or even, I know you know this, your analysis of Ike Turner and your choice even to put him in the book, which I think is beyond justified, but obviously I think one of the arguments of your writing life has been.
One friend wrote to me, it's da-da-da-da-dum, and there was a series of compliments. And then she said, and I was going to add reckless. Okay. But that is really true.
Yeah. And I guess I do think that I have a fear that amongst writers that I know, that we are not willing to be that reckless, or we are not willing to say what it is that we actually do believe. And I think when we read that Ike Turner analysis, it's it just rings so true. It feels so real. And so I wanted to know,
but let me ask you this: Are you quote women of your generation or writers of your generation? Are you talking about the fear that comes with being online on Twitter, Facebook? Are you talking about Twitter and all those other platforms? You've left Facebook behind, or are you talking about the books you're writing, or the essays, the reviews you write? Does it permeate every form of writing, or is it really,
I think it does,
the distended internet?
I think it permeates every form. And I think there is a collapse, even within the social spaces of our world, where the writer is supposed to be a good person and is supposed to even be able to be synonymous with an activist figure, with the uplift of the race.
Yes, that is true. God, that shows up in every single generation, going back a couple of centuries, for Black writers. It just mutates, it gets a different mise en scène, a different medium, but the same demands. I'm not much on Twitter or other platforms, and I've always told myself, I follow people, but it's too much time. It takes up too much effort. I think probably I don't do it in part. I hadn't realized this till you said it, because that's one more fear I don't want to have to entertain. Of course, someone can take, and people did that with Negroland. They take portions, of it and put it online and criticize. The other day, a friend of mine who was teaching it had a student who wrote a very angry email saying, how, this title, how dare she use it, and how dare she have used the N-word, which I did in the search. So I'm aware, and I keep my distance. I think a lot of the anxieties you're describing affected me when I was a beat writer at Newsweek, and also at the Times, and sometimes for other places that you freelanced for. I felt very much this sense of almost a pull between how I wanted to engage with the material, in a sort of idealized Margo the critic form, and the cultural politics, the gender politics, the fact that I was often the only Black woman in a certain critical space. So that's where I experienced it, and that is generational. It's not as ubiquitous in that older form. It's not as instantaneous, and in that way, it probably wasn't as lethal in terms of it just paralyzing you in advance. It sets off all those in all these mediums. We're talking about self-censorship, the fear, right? Yeah. And one's notion always absorbed, by everything from one's friends to one's enemies to, whatever, to the dominating ideology of what you should be thinking and doing. And who are you betraying if you don't?
Absolutely.
But is it worth it to you, at that moment? Yeah.
It's me. I've always wanted to ask you, after you started, writing about the Black bourgeoisie and the way that you do, being this paradox of the Black bourgeois rebel, would you have friends or former compatriots who would kind of come up to you and say, Margo, what are you doing? Like, why are you telling our secrets?
Not that much. I certainly knew people. One old compatriot said to another old compatriot, do I have to buy this new book? I guess I do. Did she talk about suicide again? But I also got people coming up to me and saying, okay, not forgiven. I remember very well how girls like you acted towards me, on the bus or in that. So I would get that in various directions. Some people thought I was still being, a little bit of a bourgeois, self-indulgent creature with the suicide thinking. So there it is. God knows what will emerge this time.
Gosh, I mean, I think
I will tell you, I was relieved that that more of my parents' friends, again, many of whom I just adored, that most of them were gone when Negroland came out. Because I remember one friend in particular whom I was very fond of. She would say, at last you're going to tell our story. And I would think, you mean I'm not telling it the way you want me to. And, my mother would give me all this information. And then she'd say, I'm a very private person. So these messages were mixed. So in a way, being a survivor and in a sense an orphan of that world helped give me freedom.
Absolutely. And I think adult orphanage is a theme that comes up in constructing often with respect to your family, but also I think of it in terms of even I realize that I'm becoming part of a generation that's no longer the youngest writing. I'm starting to feel like orphaned between.
Yes. I remember that. Yes.
But it made me curious about how you deal with the process of looking back on idols and realizing certain, the snobbery that you had towards Ella Fitzgerald as a girl who didn't know what to make of this.
The girl, the sweat, yeah.
Right.
These you spoke about it yesterday. The whole appearance that in some way seemed embarrassing to us as Negro girls.
Right. And so when I read these passages, I keep thinking about, gosh, how do you, I guess I keep asking the same question over and over again, but how are you honest about realizing the way that you thought in the past? And how do you identify the right muse, the muse that's going to allow you to show yourself at angles that are not necessarily only becoming, at the unbecoming angles?
Therapy, years of very good, mostly very good therapy. It is, a rich and complicated and dense and layered tool for helping you do find ways to do exactly what you just said, to examine, to turn in the light, and to try it, at another angle, another light, to confess and concede things that are shameful, and to realize that nothing is to be gained by just giving in to them. You find a way, but also not that when you first start therapy, you think, oh, it's like being bipolar. You're feeling good and you think, I'll never be depressed again. Once I have this insight, I am on the road, the royal road. And again, really good therapy or analysis, whatever mode you pick, it keeps that process complicated and varied, and it keeps you interested in finding ways through and around. And if you are, a writer or some other kind of thinker, artist, whatever, then you want to turn those tools into the tools of your work, of your trade. That's what help. That's what, more than help, I would say, has basically saved me from absolute thwarted stasis.
I think often about how you both address yourself in the text. There will be maybe in bold a moment of you calling yourself Professor Jefferson and saying, wait, should we go down this road or should we double back? You question yourself, and you also address the reader, which puts me in the mind, obviously, of George Eliot, having done that in her fiction, but in theater as well. And so I wanted to ask you about the development of that. I don't even know what to call it, but it's completely Jeffersonian, I'd say. Willingness to touch the audience in a way that was certainly not associated with the role of the weekly critic, and also maybe not associated with like the more removed American way of writing memoir.
Oh, but there are so many people. I love everything that sounds complimentary, but there were so many other writers who, don't do the American way. But I thank you for that one. But to me, once I began to work with these, modes of address, dissent, self-dissent, hello audience, they felt like tools of power. Maybe conquest is a strong word, but if again you are doing criticism, always involves, however arrogant or high-handed you are always in some way, I think, at least I was, you're negotiating with the audience. Often you're negotiating, certainly I was, with audiences that are in dissent. I might, generationally, racially, gender-wise, so I was always grappling with that. And, we spoke a little of self-censorship, and always trying to guide myself so I could get this message there and that, and then still have it be calmly and orderly, monitoring myself professionally. All these tactics and devices felt like, just wonderful tools of play and of impersonation and of being a moving target, really, always on the landscape, on the move, on the lam. Like the confidence woman, here I am. You didn't
Bing Crosby
show up sounding like, here we go.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually love to talk about the Bing Crosby moment in this.
That started as a tiny little performance that I did. I think it was at Symphony Space. A group of people, Suzy and Maggie Roach, the folk singers, had organized the whole evening, and I had been at Anna DeVere Smith's Institute on the Arts and Civic Dialogue with them. So, it was really like a variety show they staged one night. And I'd been kind of obsessed with Bing Crosby, as you could see from the book, for some time. I just thought, I'm gonna write a monologue. I'm going to do this. So I got a friend to tape little sections from his singing. I found little white buck shoes and a jacket and a little cap. And I went on stage and did this. And then I put it away. We talked a little about that earlier. Okay, we've done that. And then as, this train of thought really coming out of Topsy and minstrelsy, and again, that desire to turn the tables on a form, on a practice that you are thrilled by in some way, but which punishes you. So you turn the tables and you invert the power dynamics. So I went back to it when, this Topsy stuff started emerging, or something led me back to it. But I found it and I thought, oh, okay. And then Condi Rice and George Bush.
Incredible. Oprah and Dr. Phil.
Oprah and Dr. Phil, that's right.
So this idea for the audience, if you haven't read the memoir yet, but Margo has this really, really funny in my mind section of talking about Black women who had certain minstrels by their side. Oprah.
And Oprah and Dr. Phil. Condoleezza Rice, it was in particular quote of hers where she said, I'm internalizing his world. And I thought, this little cheerleader, from Yale cheerleader who managed to become president, you're internalizing his world. But something about, I think I say about Bing Crosby at the end in his voice, I can do anything and I'm entitled to everything. And I do think that's part of the fascination. Of course, if you're Oprah, you also control Dr. Phil. I could, for that amount of time, control Bing Crosby.
And I think about we think of power dynamics as being so staid, but the thing about power and privilege is that it can just as easily be taken away as it can be given. And I was really interested in your meditation on why you have such an attraction to Black male performers, because there's a moment where you kind of speculate that your attraction might be the thing that we sort of apply to white women in the ways that they look towards Black men,
and white men too, for the whole history of rock and roll. Yeah,
absolutely. And really, like, a bell went off in my head because I'm so used to thinking of myself as being not subservient, but always like under Black men in a certain hierarchy, but it's not necessarily how that plays out in real life. And I felt very liberated, feels a little maudlin, but once I read that, it allowed me to feel like I was more of an agent in my attraction to Black men.
Well, you've just said something that, it's so crucial. This business of how we find ways to be more of an agent, in this wild world, which starts when we're children, overwhelmed by impressions and images and, orders and dictates, and wanting to disobey, but being thrilled to obey in certain ways. It's how you find that, growing up, growing into yourself and your culture and your temperament, is, as you just put it, finding a way to be the agent of these desires and needs, and some of them are even afflictions, right? But yeah. And in that way, with this, oh my God, I love, I'm fascinated by these Black male performers. I wanted the power they had, even when it was constricted or constrained, it still was more than I had. I wanted it, that theatrical longing, that made me the agent. And then again, I could work to find the words that gave me access to them, and it made them mine temporarily.
Mm-hmm. But also permanently through the writing.
Okay, that's true. Okay. It's in a book now. That's right.
So we just have a couple more minutes before a Q&A. So I want to remind everyone to get your questions in. I will ask them. But I wanted to just, while we wrap up our portion of the conversation, to ask you about family. Because Negroland, your family is the lens through which you write about this society, the Black elite. Whereas in constructing, you're writing about yourself. Your autobiography is helmed by your relationship to certain artworks. However, you do talk about your family in these ways that, gosh, it's almost like you're reading Negroland again, but from a different angle. That's partially obscured, which I thought was very fascinating. And I just wanted to know how confession changes when you're writing through loss, you know, in these past 10 years. You are now your family. You are the one who represents them all. And so
I have, thank God, a niece and grandniece, but I am this, you know, I'm the senior member, the aunt, matriarch,
yeah, the matriarch.
And I never expected, particularly with all but omnipotent sister who was only 3 years older. I never expected.
Right. And so much of your life, you know, has been about, I'm not just going to get married because I'm supposed to get married. And I guess I just wanted to hear about how, not even necessarily as a writer, but as a person, how you're negotiating this change.
So you never get over the loss. You absolutely never get over the loss. That does not mean that there aren't also, and certainly weren't. I felt it more acutely with my parents. Oh, I am free of certain things. I really am. I'm in this. I'm the adult now here. So they are my. In that way, they're inside me. They're my they're my inner life, part of my inner life. They're also my material, you know, to be crafted. They marked me so thoroughly that it's, you know, you want to keep finding ways to be a self that isn't wholly determined by them. So that is part of what I write about, the parts that I feel have been very determined by them and the parts that aren't. With my sister, she became and still is, you know, a dazzling character whom I measure, play my own temperament against and with. You know, she was very, very strong-willed. I was much more duplicitous. You know, she was very forceful and very, you know, very Betty Davis. You know, and here I am going around with, you know, Beth and Deborah Carr, and we met on Nina Simone. You know, she in a funny way is almost the platonic ideal of the, or the ideal, not platonic, of the Black girl I grew up with in this world, whose persona and whose ways and will always, you know, be material for me, a kind of measure of that world, of the truth of it. I don't mean, you know, the truth of everything she said or did, but just the stuff of it. Yeah, the choreography of it.
Margo, thank you so much. I had
really
a ball talking with you.
It was great. Yeah. I let so much time go by.
And so I think we have a couple of questions, which I will read aloud. So this person says, I've read some of your writing on Mrs. Dalloway, and like you, she played with perspective, chronology, and form. What is the appeal of Dalloway and or Woolf to you, and did Woolf's writing inspire you at all?
Woolf, I have really intensely admired and loved Woolf since probably the late 60s. The criticism as well as the novels, and the her breaking through these, working constantly through these I mean, she would go mad. She was also, you know, a lady. She had the tea time, you know, manner, but she also had this wildness. Also the curiosity. So I felt that despite all her entitlement, there were, in a sense, almost handicaps that she had, that she kept having to work with. Any writer that has some kind of what I might identify as a handicap, a weakness, that appeals to me, and I want to study any artist, how they how they get past what seems maybe almost unbearable to them in their lives. Mrs. Dalloway appeals to me because of the, just the technical range of it, but the juxtaposition of these two worlds. There is Clarissa, there is Septimus, and there is time, and there is fate, and it is a serious amidst all that lyricism, critique of patriarchy, of war, of in certain ways even empire.
We have another question. Could Miss Jefferson please talk about the dance between therapy and the creative process? How does one inform and direct the other?
Well, they're both ways, methods of examining closely without trying to justify yourself, but also to me, and I would say this is true of therapy too, yourself in the world. I often think of memoir, or the ones that I like to write, as cultural memoir. I think of therapy as cultural self-investigation, meaning whatever you're finding out about yourself has to be also lived out in this larger world, and you are committed also to finding out things about that world. That pretty much describes my writing process. Particularly, I'm a nonfiction writer, so that's what I have to do. That's why I'm always I'm always looking for a different word for criticism, because it feels a little stuck, a little polite and stuck, almost passive, weirdly enough. But that's why I'm always calling, using phrases like temperamental autobiography or cultural memoir, just to keep that sense of openness, of multiplicity, that's enough.
We still have a couple minutes, so I think I'm going to ask another question.
Okay.
So there's a moment in the book where you are talking about Nina Simone, who you and Denise, your sister,
yes, and that wonderful first album of hers, yeah.
Right, with the cover of her sitting on the bench, 26 or 25.
Looking so contemplative.
Yeah. Right. And you talk about, it was so striking to me, how you identify that her face in some ways was Michaela Coel's face. And I was like, that's completely correct. Michaela should play her in a film. But then also I was wondering, I was like, oh, that's one of the few more modern examples of art that you let sneak into this book. Because
no, that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Right. And so I guess my question is two-pronged. Are there other artists or writers working now in film, music, that you feel like are activating that same part in you that was activated as when you were younger? And also, why did Michaela slip by?
There are, I think a few years ago for the Times, I wrote about Cécile McLaurin Salvant, and I am still following her, but there are lots of things I'm really interested in and starting to watch and letting myself be galvanized by myself. It's fine. But, I've been living so much in that old that I'm just right now a common reader, listener, viewer. And we will see what really, many things interest me, but we'll see what really, really claims me. The nice thing one nice thing about the contemporary and that Michaela Coel is suddenly it gave me access, because a Coel, she didn't exist, when I was coming along. She couldn't possibly. I mean, Nina Simone was the closest, but she was in little jazz clubs, and then she was in, the kind of Black music world. She could never have existed as Coel does, and that's just extraordinary. So that gives one access to looking back at Nina Simone that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And it helps break free of that shame because every time you write about some old shame or fear or whatever, you are reliving it. So when you get data, not just, your own wisdom or hard thought, when you get data from the real world that pushes you past it, that's fabulous.
Absolutely. Well, Margo, again, it has been so wonderful talking with you tonight about constructing a nervous system. I feel like Vanna White.
Oh, you know what?
Let's do it together.
Let's do it together. That's right.
You are truly, I think, a North Star for so many viewers, writers, lovers, haters. You're just incredibly important. And this is an amazing book. And
thank you, Doreen.
Of course.
You were wonderful. I also have to tell you something you wrote that amused me so much. Speaking of being naughty, I hope no one got angry at you. You were writing about the Bell documentary about Bill Cosby. And I think he says we have to have a conversation about Cosby. And you said, I think I've got to write, why do we have to have another conversation about Cosby? And I thought, I understand. Right.
Well, you have also always been, this idea that Cosby had always been sanctified by everyone is not true, because I remember knowing that you were never a Cosby fan, really.
I didn't realize how much there was not to be a fan of. I didn't know horror story, but no, he became absolutely insufferable and obnoxious even before we knew he was a monster.
Yeah.
Very
the fact that you caught that means the world to me. But I don't know why we need to have a conversation that has been had thousands of times.
I'm a little impatient, people. I'm writing this piece, but I'm a little impatient.
Well, let everyone continue to be naughty.
That's right. That's right.
Think your best thoughts and thank the world for Margo Jefferson.
Oh, thank you.
All right. Bye.